adequately serving. Now, we've rolled that back. All our Southern papers have rising circulations. The Globe and Mail is a good paper, but it's basically a business paper with parliamentary coverage, some foreign bureaus, a smattering of trans-Canadian news, and some nostalgia for Torontonians living elsewhere than Toronto temporarily. We're mainly temporarily.
So
it's a good paper, but it's not really a national paper in the way that we are.
So what makes yours a national paper if the Globe and Mail is not?
Well, we have 58 newspapers in the country, and we have the full feed from all of that. We have an incomparable news-gathering service for print media inside Canada, as well as a very strong one outside Canada. It doesn't mean the Globe isn't a good newspaper, but in the sense we mean it, it isn't a national newspaper. There's nothing wrong with them calling themselves one when there was no alternative for that title, but there is now, as of today.
You've said the tone of this new newspaper will be something you call originally conservative. How will you cover big Canadian stories, such as the Quebec election coming up, in a way that is very different from the other newspapers anywhere in the country?
Well, I think the actual reporting will be fairly similar. We do have, I think, excellent correspondents in Quebec, but so do some other people. I don't want to suggest that we have a monopoly in that. But the reporting, I think, will be good, but not particularly different from others. But our perspective on Quebec is a little bit different, I think. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we are not participants in the consensus of endless preemptive concessions to Quebec nationalists on the theory that if we just go on facilitating a situation in which all those Quebecois who, when asked jurisdictionally what they want, can say more and think that a separatist vote is a risk-free enterprise, we think it is time, with the best of goodwill and an absolute absence of anything but goodwill towards French Quebecers, nationalist or otherwise, that Quebec be invited to make a selection as to what it wishes to do. I mean, this business of hanging the whole country out at ransom every few years when it suits a separatist leader to do it in Quebec is not satisfactory to anyone in this country, including the Quebecois.
Was there something very distinctive about your tone today in your first issue about the political issues you covered?
Not on that subject.
The Unite the Right subject with Klein.
Well, that was a bit of a scoop for us. And I think it illustrates the fact that this isn't exclusively a Toronto paper. We have very good contacts in Alberta, and we had that story. But I wouldn't, I think we could get a little carried away here claiming too much for the opening edition. We were quite satisfied, without being smug about it, with our first effort, but I think the tenor and character of the paper will become clear as time goes by. We can't do it all on day one.
I have to ask you this, because you've been very critical of some journalists in this country, and one of your famous remarks, I think,
some of them have been critical of me.
of course, is that you said that Linda McQuaig, journalist Linda McQuaig, deserved to be horsewhipped.
Yeah.
She's now writing for your paper. How do you feel about that?
Well, obviously, if I didn't approve of it, it wouldn't be happening, would it? I feel that it's an illustration of our sincere determination to provide a range of views and not to violate the principle enunciated by the former chairman of the London Daily Mirror when it had a circulation of 5 million, and he said, if I only put in the paper what I wanted to read, our circulation would go down to 1. I don't expect to enjoy reading her stuff, but we're a broad church. We're trying to give plenty of variety to everyone. My comment that you quoted was in reference to a single episode where what she did in reference to me was fairly outrageous, but that was 16 years ago.
How will the National Post change journalism in this country, do you think?
Hard for me to say. I question my own objectivity in that, but I think you'll find that we will certainly try to be on the side of those elements already active in the national press that are trying to separate reporting from comment and trying to give variety and balance in comment. And secondly, I think we'll make things a little bit livelier, a little snappier, so maybe try and raise the standards of writing a little bit. Not to say that there aren't good writers and good accessible papers published by other people, but in general we'll try and be a force for greater literacy and a little more wit in the headlines, that kind of thing, without being sensational about it. Now, those are wishes. We haven't done it yet, but that's what we'll aim to do.
All right, thanks, and good luck. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much, Leslie.
The National Post is taking dead aim at one of the oldest newspapers in the country, the venerable Globe and Mail. So, on day one, how did they compare? On the front page of the Post, a photo and feature article on John Glenn, the American astronaut. A story on a Canadian company's links to the Russian mob. An interview with Ralph Klein. And an article about Boris Yeltsin, mad that Jean Chrétien has scrapped a trade mission to Russia. The front page of the Globe. A photo of the Canadian autumn. 3 articles on Canadian health issues. The Canadian Army's preparedness for computer problems in the year 2000. And a feature on Yeltsin's rival, Russian politician Alexander Lebed. Inside the Post, a section called Parliament, featuring 2 articles on the parties of the right. One on the APEC inquiry, and one criticizing Jean Chrétien's comments about the Constitution on the eve of a Quebec election. Post editorials. 2 items on Chilean leader Augusto Pinochet's arrest. An essay critical of the Trudeau legacy. And an editorial openly dismissive of Joe Clark's bid for the Conservative leadership. Inside the Globe, editorials, faint praise for Joe Clark, why Chrétien should shut up on Quebec, and why Canadians should worry about health safety. Now, the view from the readers, and admittedly, these are not your average readers. Shari Graydon is president of Media Watch, a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating sexism in the media. She joins us from Vancouver. Stephen Kimber is a newspaper columnist and director of the School of Journalism at the University of King's College in Halifax. And journalist Ian Austen joins us from Ottawa. Stephen Kimber, we'll start with you. What is the view from the East Coast about the National Post?
Well, my 14-year-old son, I think, summed it up this morning when he looked at the paper and he said, "It's nice, but..." And that was the feeling that I got. We've got another Ottawa-centric, right-wing business paper. We already have one of those. I don't know that we actually need this one.
And Shari, what about you? What does it look like from Vancouver?
Well, same thing, really. I thought the editorial cartoon summed it up. Where's the dog? Exactly. You know, we've got all these other papers, and it was nice that they acknowledged that, but it really does beg the question. And certainly, from a West Coast perspective, you know, there did seem a couple of self-conscious attempts to acknowledge that we're alienated out here and we want to be included, and so they had the double-page 2-inch stories running across the top saying from west to east instead of east to west. But it didn't really do anything, as has just been said, that we don't have already, and certainly it didn't appear to be a national paper. When you looked at all the folks who were profiled in the glossy brochure included in the paper as key columnists and writers, they were all white folks from Ottawa, Toronto, Central Canada.
Ian, since you're in Ottawa, let me ask you, what do you think of the political coverage of the National Post?
Well, you know, I was a bit puzzled by their obsession today with the Unite the Right movement to bring the Tories and Reform together. I mean, the people who say they're Tories on the weekend more or less elected Joe Clark as leader, which doesn't strike me as, you know, that they're about to join Reform, yet we were treated to 3 stories about this issue today. It was, to me, just sort of baffling.
Stephen,
I actually thought...
Oh, Shari, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought it seemed unusually predictable. I mean, in a paper put out by Conrad Black, I was surprised at how predictable some of the content was. I thought, at very least in their first week, they would make some semblance of attempting not to wear the ideology or the agenda on the sleeve, so to speak. So I found that a little surprising.
Stephen, let me ask you about the front page, the cover story with the big photo, which is important. It was a story about an American astronaut, John Glenn, who's going to space at 77. That's a good story, but it's not Canadian.
It's a good story. It was well written by a guy who I'm delighted to see back in newspapers. But this is a front page story that we've been laboring, that the people in that newspaper have been laboring at for a number of months. I don't think so. I don't think that was a good opening story. And the picture was awful. I mean, it's, you know, good.